Imagine a toothache with no end. No pharmacy down the street, no number to call, no appointment to book, just the pain and whatever you could find. Dental decay was one of the most universal forms of suffering in all of human prehistory. So what did ancient humans actually do about it, and how far were they willing to go? Tooth decay was not a modern problem. It was not even a farming problem, though farming made it catastrophically worse. The skeletons at Taforalt in Morocco prove it. Taforalt is a cave site in North Africa where hunter-gatherers, not farmers, were buried. They lived between 15,000 and 13,000 years ago, several thousand years before agriculture existed anywhere on Earth. When researchers analyzed 52 sets of adult teeth from those skeletons, they found decay in more than half of the surviving teeth, with only 3 individuals showing no signs of cavities at all. The cause wasn't grain. Starchy wild foods clung to their teeth and fed mouth-dwelling bacteria, which fermented the carbohydrates and produced acid that essentially dissolved the enamel. The pain was real. The crisis was real. And it was ancient. What farming did was scale the problem. As people grew more plants around 10,000 years ago, they ate more fermentable carbohydrates and created a favorable oral environment for the bacteria that caused decay. More people, more grain, more sugar, and suddenly a problem that had always existed became civilization-wide. Abscesses that swelled into the jaw, infections that had nowhere to drain, impacted teeth pressing against bone. None of these were minor inconveniences. An untreated abscess can spread to the throat, to the brain. People died from toothaches, quietly, anonymously, in enormous numbers, across every culture that ever existed, and they desperately needed an explanation. The belief in a toothworm as the cause of dental pain arose independently in cultures across the globe, with one of the earliest known references appearing in a Sumerian text from ancient Mesopotamia, dating back to around 5000 BC. That cuneiform tablet describes a celestial conversation where the worm asks to dwell among the teeth and gums, sucking blood and gnawing roots. Think about what that image tells you. These weren't unintelligent people. They were watching a tooth slowly hollow itself out from the inside, feeling a rhythmic, pulsing agony that seemed to move, and they concluded something alive was in there. The visual appearance of decay, a dark hole resembling one bored into wood, likely fueled the theory, as did the intense, rhythmic pain that felt like something was moving inside the tooth. They had a theory. It was completely wrong, and it dominated medicine for thousands of years. The belief that worms cause dental disease was the accepted theory in Europe until the 18th century, and in China until recent times. 7,000 years of the wrong answer. But that wrong answer produced the first wave of treatments, because once you believe a worm is eating your tooth, you have to do something about the worm. A common method involved smoking the worm out. Practitioners would heat a mixture of beeswax and henbane seed on a piece of iron, directing the resulting fumes into the cavity using a funnel. Henbane is a mild narcotic, which meant it likely offered some temporary relief, not because it killed any worm, but because it mildly sedated the person suffering. They were accidentally doing pharmacology while performing an exorcism. Cloves were pressed against inflamed gums for their numbing compounds. Heat and cold were applied to the jaw. Incantations were spoken over the tooth in Egyptian and Mesopotamian records, treating the pain as something that could be bargained with, commanded, or driven out by ritual. None of it touched the tooth itself. All of it was pain management, sophisticated, creative, sometimes accidentally effective pain management. But the decay kept spreading, the abscess kept building, and the tooth kept dying. At some point, someone looked at that rotting tooth and had a completely different idea. Not how to drive something out of it, how to go in. The toothworm theory dominated medicine for thousands of years. Would you have believed it? If you were feeling that rhythmic, pulsing pain and watched a tooth hollow out from the inside, Does that explanation actually make sense to you? Drop your answer in the comments below. Because the moment someone decided to stop bargaining with the pain and actually go inside the tooth, that's where things get genuinely strange. That shift from driving out the pain to physically entering the tooth is one of the most consequential moments in the history of medicine. And the evidence for when it first happened is sitting in a Neolithic graveyard in Mehrgarh, Pakistan, and it is older than the wheel. Researchers found 11 drilled molar crowns from 9 adults in a graveyard at Mehrgarh that dates from 7,500 to 9,000 years ago. 9,000 years ago. Think about that number. The wheel appears in the archaeological record around 5,500 years ago. Written language, roughly 5,000. These people were drilling into living human teeth, precisely, deliberately, before either of those technologies existed. Microscopic examination showed precisely shaped circular holes in the enamel and dentin, consistent with marks made by flint-tipped bow drills, the same type of tool used for crafting beads and ornaments during the Neolithic period. They borrowed a bead-making tool and turned it on a tooth. The marginal smoothing of the drilled areas confirms the drilling was performed on live people who continued to chew on those surfaces afterward, and the 11 crowns were exclusively first or second permanent molars, too far back for aesthetics. This was not decoration. This was treatment. No anesthetic, no sterile field. A bow drill spinning a flint tip into a back molar while the patient held very still and hoped for the best. Then there is the Launch Cave in Slovenia, and a jaw that spent over 100 years in a museum in Trieste before anyone noticed what was inside it. Researchers found that the material filling a large crack in the tooth, which infrared spectroscopy identified as beeswax, filled a cavity, and radiocarbon dating placed both the wax and the tooth at around 6,500 years old. The tooth showed signs of wear and trauma, suggesting it had been fractured during the individual's lifetime, likely causing considerable pain, and researchers confirmed the beeswax was inserted while the person was still alive, presumably as a form of pain relief and structural support for the damaged tooth. Someone packed a cracked tooth with beeswax to seal it, and that filling is still intact today. The oldest filling in human history, and it held. So, who was actually doing this work? The answer is specialists, real ones. The flint drill heads at Mehrgarh were found associated with beads, suggesting that skills developed for bead making were successfully transferred to drilling teeth, which means whoever was drilling teeth had a specific craft background, a specific skill set, and was probably not doing it on themselves. By the time Egyptian civilization was producing written records, dental practitioners had titles. The ancient Egyptians had a named court official, Hezi-Ra, who lived around 2600 BC, and whose tomb inscription identifies him as a physician of teeth, making him the earliest named dental practitioner in the historical record. Later, Roman practitioners were working with iron forceps specifically designed for extraction, tools whose basic shape and function would remain largely unchanged for nearly 2,000 years. But here is the angle almost nobody considers when they think about ancient dental pain, and it reframes everything. The physical agony of a rotting tooth is obvious. What gets overlooked is what chronic dental disease did to a person's ability to survive at all. A person who could not chew, could not process the calorie-dense foods, seeds, dried meat, hard roots that sustained communities through lean seasons. They fell behind, lost weight, and their immune system weakened. In a world without soft food substitutes, the inability to chew was not an inconvenience. It was a slow death sentence. Dental health was a survival variable. A community that could keep its members chewing was a community that kept its members alive and contributing. That is why the drilling happened. That is why the beeswax filling happened. Not out of compassion alone, but because a person who could not eat was a person who could not work, fight, hunt, or farm. The mouth was load-bearing infrastructure. The next time you sit in that dentist's chair dreading the needle, the drill, the bill, every single part of that experience was invented by people working with bone tools and beeswax, with no understanding of bacteria, no x-rays, and no anesthetic beyond a mouthful of henbane. They built dentistry out of pure necessity in the dark, with tools borrowed from jewelry making, guided by nothing except the certainty that the pain had to stop and the tooth had to function. And it worked well enough that the species survived. Subscribe for more on what ancient humans actually endured, and watch this one next.